It was close to midnight when the music died. The chandeliers flickered once, twice, then the whole hall dimmed into uneasy silence. The laughter, the clinking of glasses, the polished smiles, gone. What replaced it was the sound of whispers and panic moving through a sea of sequins and satin. I sat quietly at the edge of it all, my hands wrapped around a half-empty cup of tea that had long since gone cold. They had finally given me a chair hours after pretending not to see me standing by the wall. The tea wasn't warm anymore, but my peace was. Across the room, voices began to rise. "The payment didn't go through," someone yelled. "They're saying the bill was declined." Another voice, sharper, trembling. "We can't reach the bank. Somebody fix this before the manager shuts it all down." And then I heard it. "Go find her. Find his mother." His mother. That was me. The woman they'd avoided introducing all night. The one who wasn't good enough for the front table. The one they told the photographer, maybe get a shot later. Now they were looking for me like I was air in a burning room. I didn't rush. I just watched. Watched as the same people who had refused me a seat stumbled in their heels, shouted into their phones, and whispered in corners like gossip could solve a crisis. A young waiter hurried past me, his apron fluttering. He stopped, looked at me nervously, and said, "Ma'am, they're saying the whole wedding might be canceled if someone doesn't pay. The hotel's threatening to cut the power completely." I nodded slowly, taking another sip, even though the tea was bitter now. When I looked up, I saw my son across the room, his hand gripping my daughter-in-law's arm, his face pale and tight with panic. Moments earlier, they were glowing, wrapped in champagne laughter and congratulations. Now they looked small, like children who'd lost their way home. He saw me. For a long second, he just stood there, ashamed. Then, with a heaviness that broke something inside me, he started walking toward me. "Mama." His voice cracked as he reached me. "Please, we need your help." The crowd hushed. Even the music that was struggling to come back fell silent again. Every eye turned to me, the woman they had dismissed as old, broke, unnecessary. I set my cup down, gently. "Oh," I said softly, "you finally found me. I wasn't sure anyone would, considering there wasn't even a chair for me earlier." He swallowed, eyes glistening. "Please, Mama, I'm begging you." And there it was, the moment that rewrote the entire night. The same people who had refused me a seat were now kneeling, asking for rescue. Funny how the same people who refused me a chair now kneel before me. If someone had told me this morning that my own son and daughter-in-law would end up like this, I would have laughed. But life has a way of folding arrogance into lesson. As I rose, straightening my simple dress, the noise of the room faded. My heart didn't beat with anger anymore, just clarity. That was the night I learned. Sometimes silence doesn't mean weakness. It means you're waiting for the right moment to be heard. And that moment had finally come. I should have stayed home that day. The invitation came on a Thursday afternoon, tucked between grocery coupons and a light bill. I almost didn't notice it. Plain white envelope, no return address, just my name written in careful, unfamiliar handwriting. When I turned it over and saw the embossed gold letters, my stomach tightened. It was from my son and daughter-in-law. "You are cordially invited to the wedding of Marcus and Jasmine Carter. Cordially." Such a fancy word for people who hadn't called me in nearly 3 years. There was no note inside, no message, not even a "we hope you can make it." just a printed card and an address for the church. I stood in my kitchen, staring at it, the hum of the refrigerator, the only sound in the room. For a moment, I wondered if they'd sent it out of guilt, or worse, out of obligation. A mother's name still looks bad missing from a guest list, doesn't it? I set the envelope on the counter and tried to ignore the sting building in my chest. You'd think after all this time I'd be numb to it, but it's strange how pain from your own blood never dulls. It just learns how to hide behind your smile. My mind went back to the last time I saw them, Christmas Eve 3 years ago. I'd cooked the whole meal myself. When my son arrived, he brought store-bought pies and silence. My daughter-in-law spent most of the night scrolling through her phone, her fake laugh echoing every few minutes. Then came the argument about the inheritance, how I wasn't handling money responsibly, how selling the house would make more sense. That was the night my own child told me, "Mama, maybe it's time you stopped making decisions. Let us handle things now." Let us. The same us who moved into a condo with my savings and never looked back. The same us who called me only when they needed advice on taxes or loans. I remember sitting in my living room that night, watching the taillights of their car fade into the snow, wondering when love had turned into management. So when that wedding invitation came, part of me laughed out loud. Not a joyful laugh, just that bitter, half-empty kind that sounds like disbelief. I poured myself a cup of tea and sat by the window. The late afternoon light stretched across the floor in long, tired shadows. I thought about ignoring the invitation completely. They wouldn't even notice, I told myself. They probably just wanted to avoid the guilt of excluding me. But deep down, that stubborn piece of my heart, the one that still believed a mother should show up, no matter what, kept whispering, "Go, go, even if they don't want you there. Go, even if it hurts. Go, because one day they'll realize who truly stood by them." I took a deep breath and called my son's number. It rang 5 times before going to voicemail. I tried again. Nothing. Then I tried my daughter-in-law. She answered, her voice flat and polite. "Oh, hi. Yes, we sent an invitation. Of course you can come if you want. Things are just really busy right now." No warmth, no joy, just the sound of someone checking a box on a list. When she hung up, I sat in silence for a long while. I looked at the worn photograph on my side table. My son at 5 years old, sitting on my lap, missing a front tooth, his arms around my neck. Back then, he used to tell me, "Mama, when I grow up, I'm gonna buy you the biggest house in the world." Now he barely remembered the one I already owned. That night, I laid out my dress, a simple navy blue one I'd worn to church the year before. It wasn't new or fancy, but it was dignified. The kind of dress that said, "I came because I raised you right, not because I needed your approval." Before I went to bed, I wrote myself a note and tucked it under my pillow. Go for peace, not pride. But as I turned off the light, a small voice in my chest whispered again. I should have stayed home that day. The church sat on a hill, shining white against a gray sky. One of those new places that look more like an event hall than a house of God. Rows of luxury cars lined the street outside, and I could already hear laughter spilling from the open doors. I parked my old sedan a block away, quietly grateful it didn't make that whining noise when I turned off the engine this time. As I sat for a moment, fixing the pearl clip in my hair, I could feel my heart thumping harder than it should. Not out of excitement, out of warning. When I stepped out, a chill wind tugged at my dress. I clutched my small purse and started walking up the hill. Every step sounded too loud on the pavement, like the world was already watching. Inside, the air was heavy with perfume and self-importance. Gold ribbons, tall floral arches, glittering chandeliers. The kind of wedding that says, "Look at us," not "Thank you, Lord." A dozen people brushed past me, their heels clicking, their smiles stretched too tight to be kind. A young usher stood near the entrance, adjusting his bow tie. When I handed him my invitation, he glanced at it, then at me. His smile faltered for a split second, just long enough to sting. Right this way, ma'am," he said, leading me down the aisle. Every head I passed seemed to turn for a moment too long. There's a certain look people give when they've already decided who you are. I saw pity in some eyes, curiosity in others, and from a few, quiet judgment. Near the front, I spotted my son standing beside his bride. My heart softened for a second. He looked handsome, tall, strong. My little boy, who used to run to me with scraped knees, was now a grown man in a tailored suit. But that softness didn't last. He looked right past me. The usher stopped at a row halfway down and gestured toward an empty corner seat, except there wasn't one. Every chair was already taken. He looked confused for a moment, then whispered, "I'm so sorry, ma'am. It seems there's been, a mix-up. Someone will bring another chair soon." I nodded quietly, forcing a small smile. "It's all right, baby. I can stand." It wasn't all right, but saying so wouldn't change a thing. I stood through the entire ceremony. My back ached, but I kept my head high. I watched as they said their vows, for richer, for poorer, and couldn't help but think how quickly people forget those words once money actually shows up. When the choir sang, I mouthed the words softly to myself, the way my mother used to do when she didn't want anyone to hear her pray. "Lord, give me peace in rooms built on pride." After the ceremony, we all moved to the reception hall next door, a grand place dripping with chandeliers and mirrors, big enough to make you question your own reflection. There was laughter again, the clinking of glasses, and the smell of roasted salmon and buttered rolls. I hovered near the entrance, scanning for my name on the seating chart. It wasn't there. A woman in a tight red dress, one of my daughter-in-law's relatives, noticed me and said, "Oh, you're Marcus's mother, right? You can sit over there near the service table. There's space by the wall." Her voice was syrupy sweet, the kind that sticks to your pride, so I did. I found a small spot near the back, beside the catering station. Every now and then, waiters brushed past me, carrying trays of food I was never offered. I smiled anyway, not because I wanted to, but because I refused to let anyone see me break. When the speeches began, my son thanked his new family, his wife's parents, his college mentor, even his boss. Everyone except me. My daughter-in-law beamed beside him, her hand resting lightly on his chest, her eyes flicking toward me for half a second with something that wasn't quite a smile. It's strange how humiliation can feel quiet. It doesn't always come as laughter or insults. Sometimes it's just being erased while standing right there. Still, I kept my chin up. Pride isn't always about showing strength. Sometimes it's about not letting pain turn you bitter in front of those who expect it to. A waiter passing by paused and whispered, "Would you like some water, ma'am?" That small kindness nearly broke me. I smiled and said softly, "Thank you, sweetheart, I'm fine." I wasn't. By the time dessert came, my feet hurt, My stomach ached, and my heart felt like it had folded in on itself. But I stayed. I stayed because I wanted to see how far people could go before remembering the woman who raised the man at the altar. When the band started playing, I looked at the clock. Midnight was still hours away. I didn't know then that before the night was over, those same people, laughing under chandeliers, would be on their knees before me, and that the woman with no chair would be the only one still standing. The music, the laughter, the soft glow of chandeliers, all of it faded into a distant hum as I sat near the back, quietly watching faces that had long forgotten mine. Somewhere between the cake cutting and the first dance, my mind drifted to another time. One that smelled of cornbread and laundry soap, not champagne and perfume. There was a time when my son couldn't sleep unless he heard my voice humming from the kitchen. When he'd run in from school, waving his report card, eyes bright saying, "Mama, I got all A's." And I'd clap my hands and promise him ice cream even when there wasn't much left in the fridge. I worked 2 jobs to make sure he never felt the emptiness I did growing up. The nights I spent sewing dresses and hemming pants after my nursing shifts, those stitches held more than fabric. They held our survival. When his father passed, the house got quiet. Too quiet. I remember sitting on the edge of my bed, bills spread out around me like a battlefield. Grief had a way of making even the smallest decisions feel like mountains. But giving up was never an option, not for me, and not for my son. I still remember that conversation like it was yesterday. He was 17, shoulders hunched at the kitchen table. "Mama, college is expensive," he said softly. "Maybe I should just get a job first." And I looked at him, my baby, my only child, and said, "No, you go. I'll figure it out." And I did. I sold my wedding ring first, then the old car that barely ran. And when that wasn't enough, I cleaned houses on weekends. I told folks I was saving for a new roof, but truth was, every dollar went straight into his tuition. When he walked across that stage with his diploma in hand, I cried so hard they had to bring me tissues. He hugged me and whispered, "I couldn't have done this without you, Mama." I believed him. Back then, I believed every word. Years later, when he and my daughter-in-law were looking for their first house, I dipped into my savings again. They said it was just a small loan, something they'd pay back once they got settled. I didn't ask for a contract. Love was my contract. But love, I learned, doesn't always translate to gratitude. After they moved into that 2-story house, the phone calls slowed down. The visits stopped altogether. The only time my son reached out was when he needed something temporary. A few hundred here, a little help there. Always temporary. Until one day I said, "Baby, Mama can't do it this time." And that's when the silence began. I still remember his last words from that call. "You've done enough, Mama. We're fine." But what he really meant was, "You've done enough for us to not need you anymore." And now, sitting at their wedding, I realized how right he was. I built their comfort, and they built a wall to keep me out. My daughter-in-law never liked me much. Maybe she thought I reminded my son of where he came from, a small house, second-hand furniture, a woman who never wore fancy clothes, but always paid her bills on time. She once told him, "Your mother's too simple. She doesn't fit in with our circle." Simple. That word stayed with me. Maybe she was right. I wasn't made for circles where love was measured by status. I was built for something stronger, for storms and survival, for grace that doesn't need an audience. As the band played a love song and guests clinked glasses, I traced the rim of my cup and thought about everything I had given, everything they had forgotten. They say a mother's love doesn't expect anything in return, but sitting there, invisible, at my own child's wedding, I realized that love also deserves respect. And though they didn't know it yet, the respect they denied me tonight would be the very thing they'd come begging for before the night was over. The band had been playing for nearly an hour when my back began to ache. I'd been standing near the same corner since the reception started, half hidden behind a floral arrangement taller than me. My feet throbbed inside my low heels, but I told myself to hold on a little longer. The laughter from the front tables was loud, sharp, expensive laughter, the kind that fills space just to remind you who owns it. My son sat with his new in-laws, his face glowing under the soft lights. My daughter-in-law tossed her curls, her diamond earrings catching every flicker from the chandeliers. They looked perfect, the kind of perfect that photographs well but lives shallow. When the servers passed with trays of sparkling drinks, they skipped over my corner. I didn't mind. I had water in my purse and patience in my heart, or at least I thought I did. After the fourth course, the ache in my legs turned into a slow burn up my spine. I looked around the room, so many chairs, some empty, some holding coats and handbags. I took a slow breath and whispered to myself, "You can ask, it's okay to ask." So I did. I walked toward a table near the back where two of my daughter-in-law's cousins were chatting loudly. "Excuse me, baby," I said softly, smiling the way mamas do when they're trying not to sound needy. "Would you mind if I pull up one of those chairs? My knees aren't what they used to be." One of them turned to me, a young woman with too much perfume and too little grace. She tilted her head and smirked. "Oh Lord, these old knees again? You should have brought your own chair, Miss Carter." Her friend laughed, short, sharp, ugly. The words hit me harder than they should have. I didn't reply. I just smiled, that quiet, practiced kind of smile you learn when life has already taught you not to waste breath on ignorance. I turned away slowly, pretending I hadn't heard them. As I made my way back to my little corner, a young waiter stopped me. He couldn't have been more than 20. "Ma'am," he whispered, glancing around like he wasn't supposed to be talking to guests. "I saw what happened. I can bring you a stool from the kitchen if you want." His kindness nearly undid me. I looked at him, this boy who didn't know my story, but saw my dignity cracking, and I smiled. "Thank you, sweetheart, but I'll stand a little longer. You've got a job to do. Don't get in trouble for me." He hesitated. "Are you sure?" "Yes," I said softly. "Some things you just have to stand through." He nodded, then hurried away, leaving me with my thoughts and the hum of a song I didn't care to recognize. I leaned against the wall for support, my eyes following the dance floor where my son and daughter-in-law twirled like they'd built the world themselves. She laughed, and he looked at her the way men look at new dreams, bright, blinded, and brief. I remembered the nights I used to dance with his father in our tiny kitchen, the radio crackling in the background, our feet moving slow on scuffed linoleum. We didn't have chandeliers, but we had love, real love, the kind that didn't need an audience. Now, watching my son glide under those golden lights, I felt something settle deep inside me, a mix of ache and awakening. I realized I wasn't angry anymore. Not really. I was tired of explaining myself, Tired of waiting for respect? Tired of shrinking just to make others feel taller? So I stood there quietly, holding on to my pride like it was the last thing I owned. People mistake silence for weakness. They don't understand that sometimes silence is the only weapon left that doesn't wound you too. I watched the room spin with laughter and music, and for a brief moment I saw myself from the outside, a lone woman standing tall in a sea of forgetfulness. It wasn't weakness keeping me still, it was strength, quiet, patient, waiting for its moment. And before the night was over, that moment would come. Dinner was nearly over when someone tapped a glass with a spoon, and the chatter dimmed into expectant silence. My son stood up, buttoning his jacket. He smiled that polished, camera-ready smile, the kind that doesn't quite reach the eyes. My daughter-in-law squeezed his hand and whispered something that made him chuckle before turning to the microphone. First of all, he began, his voice smooth. Thank you all for being here to celebrate our special day. Jasmine and I are blessed to be surrounded by family and friends who supported us every step of the way. Applause rippled through the room. I joined in, softly clapping, even though my palms were trembling from the long hours of standing. He continued, thanking the in-laws, his colleagues, even his college roommate who'd flown in from Atlanta. My name never crossed his lips. I told myself I didn't need it to. I knew my place in this story. Then came the best man's turn. He was one of those men who always spoke louder than he needed to. Convinced volume was the same as charm. Let's hear it for Marcus and Jasmine, he shouted, his face flushed with drink and confidence. They worked so hard to make this night possible. I mean, we all know weddings aren't cheap, right? Laughter, the kind that follows money talk at expensive tables. He grinned wider. But hey, maybe they had a little help from the family fund. Or maybe from, He turned toward my corner, eyes glinting with mischief. The world's tiniest pension. The laughter that followed sliced through me like glass. Even the DJ chuckled behind his booth. I saw my daughter-in-law cover her mouth, pretending to cough. My son didn't stop him. For a moment, I froze. My heart pounded in my ears, but my face didn't move. Years of surviving quieter humiliations had taught me how to stay still when pride was under attack. I looked down at my cup, empty now, and traced the rim with one finger. My reflection stared back, calm, composed, almost regal in its restraint. When the laughter died, I rose from my seat. The microphone squealed softly as I began to walk toward the center of the room. The crowd hushed, their curiosity piqued. I smiled gently at the best man. Young man, I said, my voice low but clear, a pension, no matter how small, is still earned. Some things can't be said for borrowed money and fancy suits. A few gasps fluttered across the tables. He tried to laugh it off, but the sound came out awkward, thin. I turned to my son, who was staring at me, wide-eyed. Baby, I said softly, I think I'll be heading out now. I have an early morning tomorrow, meeting with my bankers. And there it was. A ripple moved through the crowd, so subtle at first you could mistake it for a breeze. Her bankers, someone whispered. Did she say bankers? I didn't wait for a reaction. I simply straightened my shawl, nodded politely toward the newlyweds, and began walking toward the door. Every step sounded louder than the music that resumed behind me. Out of the corner of my eye, I could see heads turn, glances exchanged, curiosity blooming like wildfire. Even the servers paused mid-step. I dropped a sentence so soft it barely touched the air. yet it hit the room like thunder. As I reached the doorway, the maitre d' rushed forward. "Ma'am," he said quickly, "allow me to get your coat. It's a bit chilly outside." He smiled the kind of smile reserved for people who matter. Hours ago, no one had noticed I was cold. I thanked him and stepped outside for a moment of quiet. The night air bit at my skin, but it felt cleaner than the air inside. I closed my eyes and let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. Through the glass doors, I could still see them. The polished guests, the glittering tables, my son, standing awkwardly beside his wife as whispers chased around them. My simple sentence had turned the whole evening on its head. Inside that hall, curiosity was spreading faster than gossip. Did you know she had bankers? Maybe she owns property. I heard she sold land years ago. No, she runs something private now. By the time I walked back in, the temperature of the room had changed. The same relatives who had looked past me now offered polite smiles, trying to read me like an unopened letter. I didn't give them anything more. I simply returned to my corner, smoothed my dress, and took my seat, finally a real chair this time. I could feel their eyes on me, but I kept mine on the dance floor, calm and collected. Because sometimes all it takes to shake a room full of arrogance is not anger or shouting, just a single steady sentence spoken with dignity. And as I watched my son avoid my gaze, I thought, humiliation doesn't always end with tears. Sometimes it ends with silence that makes the whole world listen. It started as a murmur, soft and uncertain, like a breeze moving through curtains. Then it spread. "Bankers," someone whispered near the dessert table. Did she say bankers? I thought she was retired. No, another voice said. I heard she sold land years ago. Maybe she's got money hidden away. Within minutes, the laughter that had once circled me like vultures turned into silence broken by whispers and sideways glances. I could feel it, the air shifting, the respect in their eyes reawakening like something buried too long. People who hadn't even looked at me before were now stealing glances, trying to connect dots that weren't theirs to know. When the servers passed again, this time they stopped at my table first. "Would you like a refill, ma'am?" one asked politely. "Maybe some dessert?" another offered. I smiled kindly, though I didn't touch a thing. "Thank you, sweetheart. I'm fine." For once, it wasn't pity in their tone. It was regard. The kind of tone reserved for someone they couldn't quite figure out, someone they might need one day. Across the room, my daughter-in-law's mother leaned toward her husband, whispering behind a fan of manicured fingers. The man's brow furrowed, then he nodded slowly, his expression shifting from smug to uneasy. My daughter-in-law kept glancing over her shoulder, her smile stretched thin as glass. Even my son, standing by the bar, couldn't hide the flicker of worry in his eyes. He was realizing something, that maybe the woman who'd stood quietly all night wasn't as forgotten as he'd believed. I sat back in my chair, calm as the tide before a storm, and let the memories rise. When my husband died, the world expected me to fall apart. People patted my shoulder and said, "You'll manage somehow." The polite translation was, "You won't." What they didn't know was that while grief broke my heart, it also sharpened my mind. My husband left behind a modest pension and a small insurance payout. Not much, but enough to plant something if one knew where to sow. I remember the day I walked into the bank, hands trembling, widow's veil still damp with tears. The young banker asked if I wanted to keep things simple, meaning safe but small, I looked him straight in the eye and said, "No, baby, I've been playing small all my life. Let's make something grow." And I did. I studied. I asked questions. I read books about investments, real estate, and compound interest until the words made sense. Every spare dollar I earned went into something. A rental home here, a small trucking business with my cousin there. Slowly, quietly, the numbers grew. I never told my son. I wanted him to build his own pride, not depend on mine. But when I realized he'd built his life on mine anyway, taking, borrowing, assuming I had nothing left, I decided silence was my best defense. Let them think I was simple. Let them think I was broke. There's a strange kind of freedom in being underestimated. Now, sitting in that glittering hall, I thought of every dollar that had turned into 10. Every piece of property I still owned under my maiden name. Every account my tiny pension had grown into. They saw an old woman in a thrift store dress. What they didn't see was the quiet empire she'd built from the ashes of her husband's death. The whispers kept swelling, curious, cautious, and tinged with fear. Even the hotel manager, who'd barely acknowledged me before, came by with a nervous smile. "Mrs. Carter, I hope everything's to your satisfaction." I looked up at him and said gently, "Everything's fine, son, just enjoying the view." As he walked away, I caught my reflection in the mirrored wall. The same face, the same hands, the same calm eyes. Only now I could finally see what they couldn't. Power doesn't need to announce itself. It just waits for the right moment to be seen. And before the night was over, that moment would come, in a way none of them would ever forget. It happened all at once, the way storms do. One minute, the band was playing an upbeat song, couples were dancing, and waiters floated around with trays of champagne. The next, the music stuttered and died. Lights flickered, conversations stopped, and a ripple of unease spread across the hall. At first, no one understood what was happening. Then the hotel manager appeared near the stage, whispering urgently to the event planner. The woman's face went pale, her hand flying to her mouth. Within seconds, the staff stopped serving, the bar closed, and whispers turned into anxious chatter. Something was wrong. I sat quietly in my corner, watching the unraveling. I didn't have to strain to hear the panic. It carried itself. "The payment didn't go through," someone hissed. "What do you mean the card declined?" "Try again." The words circled the room like smoke. My daughter-in-law's mother stood up from her table, her jewelry glittering under the flickering lights. "There must be some mistake," she said sharply. "My husband handled everything." But her husband's phone was already pressed to his ear, his face beaded with sweat. "The account's locked," he muttered. "The transfer didn't clear." And then silence. For a moment, the entire hall froze. Expensive clothes, perfect hair, wide eyes. The hotel manager's voice broke through the tension. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'm sorry, but unless the outstanding balance is settled within the hour, we'll have to stop service." The band members quietly began packing up their instruments. The caterers started whispering to each other near the kitchen door. I could feel every set of eyes darting around, searching for someone to blame. Then I saw my son, his posture stiff, his expression cracking at the edges. My daughter-in-law stood beside him, whispering furiously, her face twisted in disbelief. And then her voice rose above the murmurs. "Call my father," she snapped. "Tell him to fix it." "I did," my son said through clenched teeth. "He can't reach the bank manager. It's after hours." Their perfect night, their golden dream, was unraveling one thread at a time. I sipped the last of my lukewarm tea, quietly waiting. Within minutes, the wedding planner approached the couple, whispering something urgent. My daughter-in-law's face drained of color. My son pressed his hand to his forehead. I could almost hear his pride breaking. Then, slowly, hesitantly, he turned toward me. Our eyes met across the room. His expression was something I hadn't seen since he was a boy. Not anger, not pride, but fear. Pure, desperate fear. He hesitated for a moment, then began walking toward me, each step heavier than the last. My daughter-in-law followed, her expensive heels clicking like clock hands counting down a debt. When they reached me, my son swallowed hard before speaking. "Mama, we need your help." My daughter-in-law's voice was softer now, stripped of its sweetness. "The hotel's threatening to shut everything down. They're saying we need to settle the bill immediately. Could you?" She stopped herself, the word please dying on her tongue. I looked at them, the same two who hadn't thought I deserved a seat at their table, and smiled gently. "Oh," I said, setting my cup down with care. "You finally found me." My son blinked, unsure what to say. I leaned back in my chair, crossing my hands neatly in my lap. "Tell me, baby, do you have a chair for me now?" The question hung in the air, soft but heavy. Around us, the whispers fell silent again. People watched, pretending not to. Even the staff paused mid-motion. My daughter-in-law's lips parted, but no words came. My son looked at the floor. "I didn't come here to embarrass you," I continued quietly. "But you might want to remember that the people you step over on your way up are sometimes the same ones holding the ground steady beneath you." He looked up then, shame and understanding flickering in his eyes. "Mama, I'm sorry," he said, the words fragile and small. For a moment, I saw the boy I'd raised, the one who used to run to me after every scraped knee, the one who used to call me his hero. I reached out and touched his hand. "It's all right, baby. I'm not here to hurt you. But every lesson has its time, and tonight, well, looks like yours has come due." He nodded slowly, his throat tight. My daughter-in-law tried to regain her composure. "Can you pay them, please? Just this once?" I tilted my head slightly. "Just this once," I repeated, almost kindly. "Oh, sweetheart, this is the once." Her cheeks flushed. I looked toward the hotel manager, waiting anxiously near the door. "How much is it?" I asked calmly. When he told me, the number didn't even make me blink. I nodded, reached into my purse, and pulled out my phone. "I'll handle it," I said simply. He hurried away, relief flooding his face. My son and daughter-in-law stood frozen beside me, unsure whether to thank me or cry. I didn't say another word. I didn't need to. The look on their faces was enough. The dawning realization that the woman they'd dismissed as a burden was the only reason their night wouldn't end in humiliation. As the lights came back on and the music started playing again, I picked up my empty cup and whispered to myself, "Looks like I finally got my seat." The payment went through quietly. No fanfare, no announcement, no gratitude speech. Just the subtle sound of relief rippling through the room, like air finally filling a deflated balloon. The chandeliers steadied, the lights returned to their full glow, and the band began playing again as though nothing had happened. But something had happened, something far more powerful than the music or the money. I sat still while the staff hurried to resume service. Plates reappeared. Laughter forced its way back into the room. but the energy had changed. I could feel it. The same people who'd looked through me hours earlier now couldn't look at me without blinking twice. The whispers started again, softer this time, edged with awe instead of gossip. She paid? The whole thing? Just like that? I didn't meet their eyes. I didn't need to. I'd already said everything without a single word. When my son and daughter-in-law returned to the main table, they looked smaller somehow, stripped of their glitter. My daughter-in-law's shoulders were tight, her hands fidgeting with her napkin. My son kept glancing my way, guilt settling into the fine lines around his mouth. For the first time that night, no one laughed. No one dared make another joke about pensions or pride. The only sound that mattered was the quiet hum of respect sneaking its way back into the room. The hotel manager came to me discreetly. "Mrs. Carter," he said, his voice carrying a new warmth. "Everything's been taken care of. We deeply apologize for the inconvenience." I smiled gently. "No inconvenience, son. Just a small misunderstanding that needed a little grace to fix." He bowed his head slightly before walking away. The rest of the night moved on, but not for me. For me, time had slowed. Every glance, every hushed whisper, every bowed head was a soft echo of realization. I didn't raise my voice. I just raised my value. That line played in my mind like a prayer. It wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming the space they had taken from me. Not with anger, but with quiet strength. I thought about how easy it would have been to humiliate them back, to stand up and tell the crowd exactly how they'd treated me, how they'd refused me a chair. But I didn't. I'd learned long ago that real power doesn't shout, it settles. It sits in silence and lets the truth do the work. When the night finally ended, my son approached me again. He didn't have words, just eyes full of something between apology and disbelief. I reached up, straightened his tie, and said softly, "It's all right, baby. I didn't do it for you to owe me. I did it because that's what mothers do. We build bridges even after they've been burned." He nodded, tears threatening to fall, and I touched his cheek. "Just remember," I added gently, "some bridges take a lifetime to rebuild. Walk carefully." As I stood to leave, guests parted to make way. The same ones who'd ignored me when I arrived now smiled and nodded as if greeting royalty. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. Dignity was the only crown I'd ever worn, and tonight it fit perfectly. Outside, the night air was cool, steady, and soft. My car sat under the streetlight, old but faithful. I paused before getting in, looking back at the glowing hall behind me. The laughter, the lights, the same people who had finally learned that silence, when carried with grace, can shake the ground louder than thunder. I smiled to myself, started the car, and whispered, "Sometimes the sweetest victory is leaving quietly and letting them remember the sound of their own shame." Morning sunlight poured through the blinds, soft and golden, warming the quiet of my living room. I sat at the kitchen table, sipping my coffee from the same chipped mug I'd used for years. Outside, the neighborhood was waking up, dogs barking, children running to catch the school bus. The world spinning on, as if nothing extraordinary had happened. But I knew better. The night before had changed everything. I turned on the small television sitting on the counter, more out of habit than curiosity. The morning show host's voice filled the room. In local news, the Carter-Williams wedding almost ended in disaster last night. when the venue threatened to shut down over non-payment. A mysterious guest reportedly stepped in to save the day, settling the entire balance in full. Sources say the unidentified woman might be related to the groom. I smiled faintly and stirred my coffee. Mysterious woman. That had a nice ring to it. My phone started buzzing soon after. Messages poured in. Old friends, church members, neighbors I hadn't heard from in months. "Miss Evelyn, was that really you? Girl, I saw the news. Why didn't you tell anybody you had it like that? My sister was there. She said folks couldn't stop talking about you." I laughed softly, shaking my head. The world never fails to be amazed when quiet people reveal they've been paying attention all along. Then came a different kind of message, my son's name flashing on the screen. I hesitated before answering. His voice was careful, soft, the pride drained out of it. "Mama," he said, "I don't know what to say." "Then don't say anything," I replied gently. "Just listen." He was silent on the other end. I could almost hear his guilt breathing. "You see, baby," I continued, "respect isn't something you buy with money or weddings or fancy words. It's something you build by how you treat people, especially the ones who built you." He swallowed hard. "I know, Mama, I really do." "I believe you," I said, and I did, because I could hear the truth in his voice, raw and unguarded. "I'm so sorry for how we treated you," he whispered. "Jasmine, too. She's embarrassed, ashamed, actually." I smiled, though he couldn't see it. "Good. A little shame can grow into wisdom if you let it." He chuckled weakly, then grew quiet. "Everyone knows now, Mama. They found out you were the one who paid. Folks can't stop talking." "I know," I said, taking another sip. "Funny, isn't it? Yesterday I was just an old woman with bad knees and a small pension. Today I'm the talk of the town." He laughed softly, but there was pain in it. "I don't deserve your kindness." "You don't have to deserve it," I said. "You just have to learn from it." We talked a little longer, about small things, safer things, and when I hung up, I sat in the quiet again, letting the peace settle in. Outside, the mail truck rattled down the street. Somewhere my neighbors were probably whispering over their fences, the way people do when new money meets old assumptions. But I didn't mind. Let them talk. I'd spent a lifetime being misunderstood. A few rumors wouldn't hurt me now. I looked down at my hands, the same hands that had scrubbed floors, cooked dinners, held a crying child, and now quietly held power. People always think wealth changes a person, but it doesn't. It just unmasks who's been pretending to see you all along. The tables had turned overnight, and the best part? I hadn't even touched them. Truth has a way of doing that, flipping the whole room without you lifting a finger. I finished my coffee, rinsed my cup, and whispered to myself, "Let them whisper about my money if they want. I'd rather they learn about my silence." Then I smiled because for the first time in years I felt seen. Not for what I gave, but for what I'd always been. It's been a few weeks since the wedding, and the noise has finally settled. The whispers, the stares, the sudden invitations to brunch, all of it has quieted down, the way every storm does when people find new gossip to chase. But inside me, something softer remains. Peace, maybe, or closure, or just the relief of finally being seen without having to shout. I've always believed that time reveals what truth tries to hide. It doesn't rush, doesn't demand. It just waits, quietly, patiently, until pride collapses under its own weight. The world has a way of confusing noise with power. But that night, standing in the middle of a glittering hall full of people who once thought I was beneath them, I learned the difference. Power doesn't need to scream. It only needs to stand. My son visits now, not as often as I'd like, but often enough that the silence between us no longer feels heavy. He brings flowers sometimes, groceries other times, and once he brought an apology written in the way he looked at me, the way a man finally looks at the mother who raised him. My daughter-in-law still keeps her words neat and careful, like someone walking barefoot on glass, but I see effort in her eyes. She's learning, slowly, that humility is the finest jewelry a woman can wear. And me? I spend my mornings on the porch with my tea, watching the sun rise over the neighborhood I built my life in. The same old house, the same creaking steps, the same woman, but not the same heart. I don't hold grudges. They're too heavy to carry, and I've carried enough in this lifetime. I forgive them, not because they deserve it, but because I deserve the peace that comes after. Sometimes, late at night, I replay that moment in my head. The hall, the silence, the flickering lights, my voice steady as I said, "Do you have a chair for me now?" It wasn't bitterness, it was truth, finally spoken after years of swallowing pride. I wrote all of this down tonight because stories like mine often go untold. Women like me, mothers, widows, the backbone of families, we live our strength in silence. We raise generations who forget that the hands that once fed them can still hold power. So if anyone's listening, here's what I've learned. Never measure someone's worth by the seat they're given. Sometimes they own the hall. If this story found you tonight, maybe it's because you needed the reminder that dignity doesn't ask to be seen, it just is. Now tell me, have you ever been underestimated, only to rise stronger than they expected? Share your story in the comments. Someone out there might need to hear it. And as always, thank you for listening.